I found out my wife was having an affair because of a yellow sticky note she accidentally left on our desk. 3 months later, 2 marriages were over, a man had lost his job, his home, and everything he'd spent years building. The strange part? I never yelled. I never threatened anyone. I never even confronted her when I first found out. Instead, I waited. I gathered evidence. I learned the truth. And when the time came, I made exactly one move. What happened next was so devastating that even I couldn't have predicted how far the fallout would spread. And it all started with a little yellow sticky note. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at the person sleeping next to you and felt it, that quiet, cold feeling that something is deeply wrong? Not a fight. Not an argument. Just a silence that shouldn't be there. A look that lasts half a second too long before it disappears. A story that almost adds up, but not quite. That's where this story begins. Not with a dramatic confrontation. It begins with a feeling. And it ends with the most calculated, legal, and surgical act of justice you have ever heard. So sit down, because by the time I'm finished, your jaw is going to be on the floor. This happened to me in the early 2000s. My wife and I had been married for almost 11 years. We had 2 kids, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. We had a house, 2 cars, a dog, and what looked from the outside like a pretty solid life. But appearances, as I would soon learn, are the cruelest lie the world tells you. It started with something small. My kids. They're young, right? 4 and 6, they're at that age where they talk non-stop. Every little thing that happens during the day spills out of them the moment you walk through the door. So when they kept mentioning that they'd spent the day at Grandma and Grandpa's house, I didn't think too much about it. But after a few weeks, it started to nag at me. My wife's parents lived almost 90 minutes away. Going there once a week? Sure. But 2, sometimes 3 times a week? On days my wife wasn't at her part-time job? That was a long drive for no particular reason. I asked her about it one evening while she was making dinner. Hey, why are you taking the kids to your parents so often? She barely looked up. They love spending time with them. What's the big deal? And she smiled. And I let it go. But I didn't forget. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The kind of attention you give something when your gut is screaming at you but your brain keeps trying to shut it up. I started noticing the mileage on her car. I know that sounds paranoid. But I kept a mental note of the numbers each morning, and after a week, the math didn't add up. She was driving nearly 400 miles more than she should have been, even accounting for every trip to the grocery store, every school drop-off, every visit to her parents. 400 extra miles. Every week. I didn't say anything. I didn't panic. I just kept watching. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon I sat down at the home computer to pay some bills. And right there next to the keyboard, just sitting there like it had always belonged, was a yellow sticky note with my wife's AOL email password written on it in her handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment. Every decent instinct in me said to leave it alone. To walk away. To trust my wife. I didn't walk away. I typed in that password and I opened her inbox, and within about 3 minutes, I found an email thread between my wife and her college best friend. I read it once. Then I read it again because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife had been having an affair. Not a one-night mistake, not a drunken lapse in judgment. A full, ongoing affair with a man she'd dated back in high school. The emails were casual, almost breezy, 2 friends catching up, talking about life, except threaded through every message was the casual, comfortable language of someone describing a secret second relationship. And the detail that made my blood run cold? My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She had also, in her emails, talked about this man's wife. Mocking her. Making fun of her appearance. Saying she'd let herself go after having kids. This woman, this stranger, was being cheated on too. And my wife thought it was funny. I printed every single email. I stacked them neatly. I put them in a folder, and I hid that folder where nobody would ever find it. And then I sat at the kitchen table and I was very, very still for a very long time. Because I had grown up watching what infidelity does to a family. My own parents cheated on each other, and the fallout, the screaming, the broken home, the way it carved something out of me and my siblings that we never fully got back. I had sworn that I would never let that happen to my own kids if I could help it. I wasn't going to blow this up in a hot rage. I was going to be smart. I was going to be methodical. And I was going to be completely, absolutely certain before I did a single thing. I needed to know who this man was. I reached out to an old friend of mine who was a police officer. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. He pointed me toward a man I'll call Ron, a former cop who had left the force to work as a private investigator. I contacted Ron the next day. He was calm, professional, and thorough. I paid his retainer, handed him the printed emails, and told him what little I knew. He told me he'd be in touch. 2.5 weeks later, Ron called me back. The report he put together was meticulous. Photographs. Timestamps. Locations. A complete picture of how my wife would load the kids into the car, drive them to her parents' house, drop them off, and then drive 40 minutes in the opposite direction to meet this man. They'd have lunch. And I'm going to be straightforward with you, they'd go to a motel. For a few hours. And then she'd drive back, pick up the kids, and come home. She had it down to a routine. A careful, practiced routine. But here's the first twist I didn't see coming. The man in those photographs? Ron had done a full background check. His name, I'll call him Bob, was not just some random guy from her past. Bob was married, had 3 kids of his own, and worked as a VP of sales at his father-in-law's company. His father-in-law's company. The business owned by his wife's family. The same family that, as Ron also discovered, owned the house where Bob and his wife actually lived. Bob had built his entire life on a foundation that belonged to someone else's family. And he was risking every single brick of it for an affair with my wife. I sat with that information for a while. I asked Ron to put together 2 additional copies of the full report. I then called my divorce attorney and had him begin drawing up the papers. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't change anything about how I acted at home. I was pleasant. I was normal. I helped with homework, I made coffee in the mornings, I smiled. And inside, I was building something. Here's where I want to be very clear, I am not a violent person. I have never been a violent person. What happened next was completely legal, carefully considered, and in my honest view, something that needed to be done. Not out of cruelty. Out of fairness. Bob's wife deserved to know what was happening to her. On a specific Tuesday morning, I arranged for my wife to be served with divorce papers at her workplace. At the same time, the same hour, Ron drove to Bob's neighborhood and sat down with Bob's wife at a coffee shop. He showed her the report. He showed her the photographs. He gave her the dates, the times, the locations. I never met her. I don't know exactly what she said when she saw those photos. But Ron told me that she went very quiet for a long time, and then she thanked him and left. And then the second twist hit me because I had underestimated what this woman was made of. Within days, Bob's wife had cleaned out their entire joint bank account. She took the children. She left. And then she called her father. Her father, the man who owned the company Bob worked for, the man who owned the house Bob lived in, found out what his son-in-law had been doing. And he fired him. Immediately. On the spot. No severance. No notice. Just gone. And then, because the house Bob lived in belonged to her parents, Bob got an eviction notice. In the span of about 72 hours, Bob lost his wife, his children, his job, and his home. Every single piece of the life he had constructed on borrowed foundations collapsed at once. But here's the third twist, and this one I genuinely didn't predict. Bob apparently couldn't accept that it was over. He went to the house that was no longer his and started an argument with his wife that escalated badly enough that her brother stepped in to intervene. Bob ended up with a broken nose. There were restraining orders filed, then violated, then more police reports, criminal charges, court appearances, and eventually jail time. Bob, the VP of sales who had seemed so untouchable, so comfortable in his life, ended up with a criminal record, no job, no family, and last anyone heard had quietly left the state entirely. And his ex-wife? She went to work at her father's company. Started from the bottom, proved herself, and by the time her father retired, she had taken over the business entirely. I thought about her sometimes. I hoped she was okay. And from what I could piece together, she was more than okay, she was thriving. As for me, my divorce was not dramatic. My ex and I were civil. We had to be, for our kids. We split custody, we kept things as stable as we could, and we both quietly moved forward. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. Of course it did. 11 years of your life, the mother of your children, that kind of betrayal leaves a mark. But here's what I also know. I didn't let it turn me into something ugly. I was angry, yes. Devastated, yes. But I handled it with my head, not my fists. I gathered the truth carefully. I acted legally. And the one thing I did for Bob's wife, making sure she had the same information I had, that was never about revenge. That was about fairness. She was being lied to just like I was. She deserved the truth just like I did. My kids are adults now. They're doing well. My ex-wife and I don't really talk anymore, not because we're enemies, but because there's simply nothing left to say. She's their mother, she'll always matter to me in that context, and beyond that, I wish her a quiet life. And me? I rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, the way you do when something has burned down and you have to decide what to put in its place. I made better choices. I found better people. I paid attention to the things I had ignored before. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: the truth is not always fast. It does not always arrive on your schedule, it does not always feel satisfying in the moment, and it does not always come in the form you expected. But it arrives. It always arrives. And the people who built their comfort on top of your pain, they cannot outrun it forever. The foundations were always borrowed. And borrowed things, eventually, always get taken back. Don't let betrayal make you reckless. Let it make you precise.